So, hello everybody, welcome back. As you may have heard, there's a lot going on in the what they call it, the red pill manosphere world with Andrew Tate, and I'm not here to really talk about all that he's accused of, but more about. I did a post, or I just did a little caption on an Instagram post. Who will be the Andrew Tate of Christian radio or Christian media or in the Christian space? And I got a few responses, nothing really major, nothing really clear, but I was wondering that same question. And I thought, well, why don't I become that? I can become the Christian manosphere guy. And there was a lot of Christians who are in the manosphere, red pill, because if anything, it seems to be sort of, maybe not really, but at times a Christian thing. The manosphere meaning traditional male values, kind of the promise keepers of old, if you're old enough to remember the promise keeper movement of the 90s, early 2000s. But with things being so, I guess, things having gone so sideways, especially with Andrew Tate. If you don't know who Andrew Tate is, then you can just Google him, as people say. But it seems to me that we need a Christian, biblical, maybe Christian alone, that word isn't enough, a biblical perspective to relationships and intersexual relationships, intersexual dynamics, because young people in the church sleeping around, Christian leaders sleeping with their secretaries, pastors who turn gay, young men who sleep around and then get ostracized from the church. Some churches that don't believe in maybe counseling, but it's all about being in a Bible study. Of course, you have then the liberal church, who you could say says everything and anything is okay. So you obviously have a lack of direction. And I think that where the church has gone wrong is we've turned everything into politics. Whereas people like Andrew Tate and Fresh and Fit and all the different influencers in this space have made it more real. They made it about relationships and sexuality and how people actually get along and come together. It has something to do with politics, which is where, unfortunately, Trump and all that craziness took this conversation. And even before that, with Dr. Dobson and folks in the family, it all became this right-wing thing. And you could say it's still a little bit of that with the manosphere and the red pill movement, but it seems like it's simpler. It's more to the point. Now the conversation is about what is a traditional man, and about feminism, and what is a traditional woman. And you have Andrew Tate and guys like that who will say a lot of amazing things about being a protector, being a provider, being a man who takes care of the bills and takes care of the leaky faucet, and who makes money for a wife and who provides. But then he goes on and say you can have as many women as you want. And because you're a top value man or a top G, you can just be promiscuous. And then you also have the blaming of women that seems to never end. And what I always think about is there's truth in everything that he says about blame. Blame, when it comes to sexuality, it goes both ways, men and women. Now, his point, and a lot of the red pill people would say that women get away with it more than ever before because of feminism. That could be. That could be. I don't know. I think that a promiscuous woman is still seen as a promiscuous woman as much as a promiscuous man. Does a promiscuous man have as much stigma as a promiscuous woman? Probably not. I would say no. The promiscuous man is maybe seen as a man just being a man, versus a promiscuous woman is seen as, 304, right? A hoe, right? And so But I think this idea of it's all one side's fault, it's all women's fault, it's all man's fault, I think it's missing a lot of things. And so the Bible continues always to talk about basically equal blame, that the men should love their women, should love one woman, should love their wives as Christ loves the church, and then that women should submit to men. And there are things that definitely are very I don't know if painful or hard to say. Or hello, my dear friend Armando, I just saw you there on the Instagram chat. Greetings, greetings, greetings. Wonderful to see you, my dear friend. Thank you for being here, talking about the whole Andrew Tate manosphere topic that we were kind of going. We mentioned that earlier in our texting. But I was thinking about how every time that I listen to Fresh and Fit or to Andrew Tate or all of these different manosphere podcasts, Pearly Things, and a million others that have popped up, a lot of it makes sense, because everything that is about women are bad and men should sleep around sounds great to the flesh, as we would call it. And we as men understand our weaknesses and our tendencies to have multiple partners and to be over-sexualized. Not every man. And then women also know their tendency, I guess, to be too masculine, and the dangers, or not the dangers, but maybe some of the problems that come from that. I have clients that I coach that are in a place where they're not married, and like they laugh a lot on these podcasts, Fresh and Fit especially, when they say you're gonna be 45 with a cat. I mean, I know clients that's kind of where they're at, and you could say that it's because they're not submissive. I have been in churches where you have unsubmissive women, and it causes division and chaos. And you could talk about how some men are too machismo. You have obviously that problem of men being too violent, or you have the other problem that is that men are too emotional. I mean, we often say women are too emotional, but then we have this. I don't know if it's a reversal of roles, but it's maybe an understanding that some women are more masculine because of X, Y, and Z, and some men are more feminine because of X, Y, and Z, or more emotional, or maybe they have more of an empathic heart. And I remember growing up, not so much in my teens, but definitely when I first came in my case, to the white evangelical church. And I began to work mostly with white males. And as a musician and as a Latino, Hispanic, right? I had this triple kind of thing that I had to grow into or fit into. First, being a dark man, a man of a darker skin. Second, being a Latino man, a Hispanic, and fitting into the white world. And then third, being a Christian man who is an artist and a musician and a feeler, an empath, an Enneagram 3, a part of the heart triad. Fitting into, I remember this one pastor of small groups, he would always invite me to these men's activities that dealt with hiking and climbing mountains and rocks and car shows and traditional male things that I went to a lot of those things and I enjoyed them all. Well, once. But what I really enjoy is conversation, music and art and beauty and meditation and pondering things that maybe most men would say, oh, that's gay, or that's not male, that's not masculine enough. Masculinity is Harleys and leather jackets, right? And then you have on the other side women who don't identify as always being feminine. I mean, I know my wife would say, I'm not into pink and into lace and into pretty things. And so maybe that's our dynamic, is we have a little bit of both and we get along 30 years of being in love. To this day, I miss, she's right now with her father in Oregon, and I miss this woman with my whole heart, with my whole life. I love her with everything in me, and she loves me. And so if she was more feminine, and I had girlfriends that were more feminine when I was a young man, I wasn't really into it, meaning more of the pretty things. I've always been into women who are strong as an artistic type. Now, if I was a football player in the traditional kind of role of being into guns and cars, would I want a more tiny kind of woman who's very petite and very gentle? Perhaps, because we always want the opposite, right? We always want the polarity. We're always looking for polarity, and especially in our sexual relationships, in our personal dynamics. And so, but then the problem comes when we begin to victimize the other person. But now let's get more practical. What happens when you have sexual problems in the church? When you have promiscuous men, you have promiscuous women, you have maybe a woman who has been cheated upon 100 times, once, 2 times, 3 times, a man who has 2, 3 BMs, baby mamas. And so, and then in the church, as I mentioned earlier, you have all of these issues where some churches, I grew up in a church that had all these same issues among young people. I was only a child then, maybe like 8 or 9. But I would hear about, oh, this guy and that girl are in church discipline, which meant basically they were, I think, exiled to Siberia from all that I could tell. And I was, 9, 10, 11, and I knew, oh, no, those people. And I thought as a preteen, I thought, okay, I guess that's something you don't mess around with, right? And then you have other churches. I used to work at the church at USC, and that was left-leaning, LGBTQ affirming. The pastor was a gay man, and you had as I said, a LGBTQ affirming church. It was a Methodist church, Methodist Presbyterian. And so you have the other end of the spectrum where anything goes, you could say. And then you would have conservative white evangelical churches, or let's say more just Pentecostal or more Assemblies of God AG churches, et cetera, including Victory Outreach, that are more, you could say, ultra-conservative, that would be appalled by that. And you have, of course, the scriptural debate, right? And I would say that there's a lot of new ones. I think you have to stand for something. I am not an LGBTQ church-affirming guy, even though I was a part of, as I said, of a church, and I was on staff, and I learned a ton to understand and to find, I guess, to get behind the story of it all and not just be grossed out or be, I don't know, just to be, it's not about being for or against it, but not being aware, I guess. Personally, I memean, I had one of our elders of the church on campus who was a transsexual person. Her name was Julia, but I think she was born as a Julio. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. And so when I first shook her hand, I began to really, it all challenged my theology both ways, to understand the grace of God, and yet to understand the end. I don't know if it's the end of grace, but it's the end of what maybe churches do and what the Bible teaches. And I began to say, well, I'm in a place here where the theology, and these were men of God who have more education than I do as far as theology and knowing the Bible. And I thought, well, the way they understand the Bible is not how I understand it. And you have to kind of draw some lines and say, this is what I believe, this is what I don't believe. You have love, you have understanding, as I said, you have deep respect and compassion. You understand the struggle that LGBTQ or trans, or now, as I said, the Andrew Tates and the red pill or the blue pill or the black pill or whatever you want to call it. You understand. I think understanding is very important, but you also, of course, have an opinion, and you have a biblical perspective to the best of your ability, based on your tradition, based on your church, based on how you grew up, based on your culture, your ethnic background. Like I said, some churches are more right, left, etc., and they all believe they have the truth. But you have a crisis, though, regardless, right? You have a crisis. We have a crisis when it comes to interhuman relationships, intersexual, interpersonal relationships, which is promiscuity, which is sleeping around, which is BMs, baby mamas, and then, of course, all the LGBTQ stuff. You have a crisis here in the West, in the United States, of over sexualization, OnlyFans, and I mean, porn is just like whatever. That's like just drinking water. Now it's OnlyFans plus, plus, plus. And then you mix it with capitalism and the fact that women, and it's true, right, are afraid of having men cheat on them. And so they say, well, I'm not going to wait for some man to cheat on me. I'm going to work myself and have my own job and make my own money. I don't need a man. And that's what the Red Pill community would say. That's what the Fresh and Fit podcast would say. And then you have the church saying, wait a minute, this isn't what God says. What God says is that a man should love a woman and a woman should submit to a man. But then women would say, whoa, what do you mean submit? What are you talking about? And some women could say, no, I want to submit to a man. I want to take care of my husband and my children, and I want to raise a godly family. And some men would say, I thank God for you, that that's what you want as my wife. And I'm going to go and provide and protect and be present. And I'm not going to sleep around. I'm going to have one woman. You're going to be the only one. It's a ride or die. But then what happens with men in their 20s or 30s who have, I don't know, 10, 20, a body count of 10, 20 people, or a woman who's been promiscuous is a 304, a hoe, right, as people say, and who also has a body count of 50, 100 men. And then what about when women get older? And this is now getting into Dr. Buss's book, which I have and I have read on same thing on, I think it's called Evolutionary Psychology, which talks about how when women hit their late 20s and they've had a hoe face, that's when they find God and now they want to settle down. But now the men that they're looking for don't want them because they're not as young. They've been around the block. They don't feel right. They're not virgins. They're not pure. They are traumatized. They've been through a bunch of stuff. They've made wrong choices. And those men are not looking for them anymore. I mean, how many times as a pastor I remember, I don't know, maybe it was early in my pastoring. I remember when I first had a young lady say to me, I'm pregnant. I thought, oh, okay, well, who was your husband? She's like, it's like a Samaritan woman thing, a John 4 thing. She said, well, I don't know. I said, what? And then so we celebrated her baby and had a big party. You know how the Hispanic church is, right? And so we had a big celebration. All that was fun. And then a second baby from another man, and a third baby from another man, a fourth baby. And I said, wait a minute, this isn't right. Like, where's the Bible? Where's your dad? Where is some discipleship? Like, what's going on here? We just keep making the same mistake, and the church keeps celebrating and having more and more baby showers and more gifts and more prayers for health and for a healthy baby. Shouldn't someone put an end to this? Like, shouldn't someone stop this from happening? What are your daughters going to do? What are your sons going to do when they come of age? Are they going to repeat the same mistake over and over again? And of course, that's what happens, right? These are generational curses. These are generational emotional pain and emotional habits and ungodly truths and things that we believe and experience, and PTSD and abuse and all the rest, all the things that this world brings to us. But we have to put an end to it, right? We have to put an end to it. And yet what happens when we ostracize people? And I mean, how many times, as I said, have you or a friend been kicked out of church because you got someone pregnant, or because your ex, who was a church leader, slept around and cheated on you and no one knew? Or when a male leader was texting a young 20-year-old, or maybe slept around with the secretary, or ran off with the I don't know, the choir director, as people used to say. And so these dynamics have been in play forever, since the dawn of time. Intersexual dynamics and problems in the church is nothing new. What is new is understanding, I guess, that there are so many more voices now in this space, and the Andrew Tates and the Pearly Things and the Fresh and Fit and what, and then of course you have the other side, right? Or you have maybe it's Ben Shapiro, or I don't know, whoever else is on the right, Candace Owens, and of course Papa Trump for some people. You have this ultra religious right voice that is pulling people in that direction as a response, right? You could say rightly so, to the quote left agenda. And now here we are being political again, right? And so that's where I think a ton of young people you lose us, quote unquote. I'm not a young person, but we lose young people when it gets political on both ends. And because the problems are more rudimentary and more ordinary and more just real, or more normal. And we're not talking about this enough. And maybe you have a percentage of the population, let's say a young girl in her 20s, who is trying to be a virgin, remain a virgin, or maybe keep their body count to 1 or 2, and they made a mistake, maybe in high school or something went bad, or a man abused or raped, and we can't say the R word. And so now she's trying to, quote, be a virgin again, right? A religious, a spiritual virgin. She's trying to do the right thing, but she lives with that guilt. And a lot of churches don't believe in therapy or coaching. They believe in just prayer and Bible study and lots of church, which is wonderful. But that trauma remains, and you don't have. And women, of course, quote unquote, tend to be more process oriented. Men, not so much. But some men do need process, and some women don't need a lot of process. So you have to have options for everyone. I tend to be more of a process oriented guy, but I've become less that way, as I realize, maybe I need to just do the right thing here. Some women maybe are very process-oriented. Perhaps I need to be less process-oriented and become more black and white in their thinking and just do the right thing. Same with men. So I always go back to Paul, of course, even though Paul wasn't married. So that's ironic, right? That we take a lot of our relationship advice from a man who wasn't married, didn't have any kids, not that we know of. But of course, he's an apostle, right? So we, of course, learn from him, inspired by the Holy Spirit. But he often said, just don't get married. If you want to be in ministry, don't get married, right? I mean, that's straight up what he said. He also said a man should love his wife sacrificially, and a woman should submit to her husband. Things that neither party likes to do or think about, or because then you have personalities. You have a boss lady, maybe an Enneagram 8 or 7, who says, "I'm not submitting to somebody. I don't need a man. I don't need a man to open my car door, to pay my bills, or to raise my kids. I'm my own boss woman." And then a man who maybe is more of a hard type, a 3, a 2, or 4, and they may say, "Well, no, I want a man to take care of me, to let me cry on her shoulder." And so you have these dynamics based on personality and wiring and how we came into this world that sometimes go against traditional roles, traditional gender roles, traditional male roles, and then men who are called toxic because they're too strong, too machismo, especially Hispanic men, right? And machismo in the Latino community, we can be too much bigote and wife beaters and beer, right? And all that kind of stigma of the typical Latino or the Latin lover, right? Who just wants everything that moves and wants to sleep with any woman or that kind of thing. And so you have these stigmas from television and novelas and our parents and maybe school and how we grew up. And we wonder then what is right, what is wrong, what do we do? And so you have this ongoing debate where the Bible continues to call us to love and to sacrificial love and to submission, mutual submission. I don't think it's only the woman who should submit. It does talk about mutual submission, but it's clear, again, if we are going to believe Paul, even though he wasn't married and didn't have kids, but again, just going back to him being that he maybe some David, maybe some Solomon, although we know David's and Solomon's problems. We don't really have a ton of interpersonal relationship advice in the Bible. You have a lot of course, do's and don'ts. Of course, you have the Ten Commandments. And I mean, I'm not saying there aren't any, because as I said, these problems are as old as dirt. The Bible's clear. Do not commit adultery, right? And so now who tends to do more porn, men or women? Well, I remember a dad Early in my pastoring career, maybe he had a 10-year-old daughter, and he came up to me once and he said, "Would you preach on promiscuity or no, on pornography?" And I said, "But your daughter, you have a daughter and she's 10." And he's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Well, okay." And I've learned now through the years of being a pastor and counseling and coaching a ton of people that women deal with being overly sexual. Okay, maybe overly sexual isn't the right way to put it, because that's maybe stigmatizing women or maybe stereotyping, right? But being, let's just say, women who love a ton of sex. And then you have women who are into pornography. And that's no longer like a shock to me. That's now normal. And I now have learned that that's just people are born that way, with an over sexualized maybe drive. And maybe some men have an underdeveloped sexual drive. You would say, for the most part, generally, it's the opposite, right? That women are more into feelings and men are more into logic, or like the fresh and fit guys like to say, men are more in their reels and women are in their fields, right? You could say that that's generally true. You could say that that is mostly true, generally speaking. But the point is that the Bible talks about submission. I would say that I have come a long way when it comes to submission, even though most women still, maybe not Hispanic women, maybe not some of our churches, but for the most part, just in general, church or not, Christian or not, women don't like, no one likes to hear the word submission. Let me just say that. Men or women, nobody likes to submit to anyone. We hardly submit to God, much less to another person. Much less if someone is, it's not worthy of our submitting, worthy of our respect. And that's a lot of things to give Andrew Tate and the Fresh and Fit people credit. They talk a lot. Well, I don't know if they talk a lot about this, but at times you'll hear, what's his name, Rollo. I have all his books as well. The one on religion is pretty awesome. Rollo Tomasi. And these are the seminal books that I think every person online who's a Christian leader, who's a thought leader in the Christian space, who's trying to bring wisdom to this manosphere and to this red pill movement, you have to read the Bible. You have to read Rollo Tomasi. You have to read Dr. Buss's book on evolutionary psychology. You have to read, I forget his name right now, but The Body Keeps a Score. You have to read The Myth of Mental Health. You have to read, and you have to be a learned individual. Of course, you can just repeat what Andrew Tate says or be against Andrew Tate, or you can just quote verses, all important things. We should all quote verses. We should all read the Bible more. But back to the problem. Aren't we all reading the same Bible and people still sleep around in the church? Aren't we all reading the same Bible and listen to the same sermons and pastors and preachers and Bible studies, and yet we're still screwing up? So these issues remain. And if you are a virgin woman or man, you're like what, in the 1%? You're in the top 10%? How many people in our churches are virgins? Men or women? I don't mean just men. I mean just women. Men or women? Or maybe they're, quote, born again virgins, as they call them, right? That's fine. Or you have divorce, or you have baby mamas, all these issues. Or back to my example of the first, one of my first members who had 4 babies, or maybe it was 3, from 3 different men, 4 different men. And you celebrate that, right? Or do you, or not? Do you kick them out of the church? You put them on church discipline for 6 months? What exactly, right? I think there has to be a process. So you have this necessary evil, you could say, of having to talk about inner sexual dynamics. Now, here's the problem. Why is Andrew Tate and Fresh and Fit and Rollo Tomasi and a million other podcasts so popular? Millions and millions of people, Christian people, yes, Christian people, whether you're against it or not. Why is it so popular? Because the church, one of the things that these people from the manosphere say is that the church, the Christian church, is the worst religion of them all. Because we have the truth, and yet we don't live like we have the truth. And I think I've thought about that, and I thought, you know what, that's very true. We have the truth. We know what God says. We know what the Ten Commandments say. We know what David said. I'm not saying he's the best example. We know what Paul said. What Jesus said, and yet we don't live out moral lives according to the Bible. In fact, we live sometimes lives that are anti-moral or immoral. And not only when it comes to sexual dynamics, but also when it comes to spending and debt and capitalism and cheating and stealing and fame and glory and all the rest, right? We have this tendency in the West as Christians, evangelical Christians in the West, meaning the US, Canada, Mexico, Europe, to water down our faith and water down what we're supposed to be like, the kind of life we're supposed to be living. And so you have a lot of problems where people don't respect who we are as Christians. And we have so many, maybe we're so hypocritical, right? I mean, how many times have you heard that from family or friends, or maybe you thought that yourself before you came to God and Jesus, or before you came back to church, you thought a bunch of hypocritical Christians, because it seems like we tend to go back and forth so much on what God has to say about everything, from homosexuality or promiscuity to capitalism to overeating, overspending, everything, right? That the West, meaning the US, trumps, and including politics and Trump, seems to promote more than the gospel, more than the rules of the game. We don't like rules as humans. But I think, and rules, of course, can be excessive and can be abusive. But it seems like this pendulum swing is constantly going back and forth from too many rules, not enough rules, too many rules, not enough rules. And right now, there's no doubt we're in a swing of not enough rules. And the slippery slope now becomes so slippery where now it's his and her and pronouns. The seminary that I have been a part of, that I have gone to, I had one of the key dean advisors have pronouns underneath his name. Blah, 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 his, her pronoun. And I thought, wow, that's sad. That truly is crazy how this man of God, who's a president or one of the main guys at you could say a conservative seminary here in the area, is using all kinds of pronouns as to not offend people who don't identify as male or female or him, her. And as I said, I learned a lot about empathy. I'm not talking about being unempathetical or being disagreeable or being mean to people, because that's the worst thing a man of color like me can do to another human being. But I think that, as I said, the lines have been drawn way too outside of the box. And so you have so many problems today where now we don't even know what to say or what not to say before you get deleted or doxxed or canceled online. And so you have Christians talking to themselves, sort of, and no one is listening. Or you have this culture, this quote Christian nation that nobody really respects anymore. Nobody respects us as a Christian country because our values, like someone said, what values? What American values? We don't have what I mean, if you think about, I was just in Europe. We were just in Italy for a couple of weeks, beautiful. And as I was talking to some of them, the taxi drivers and people just on the streets, what do you want to see in America, in the US? They're like Disneyland and the Lakers. So capitalism, okay, Nikes. So capitalism, Kobe. So capitalism, now it's entertainment. I mean, come on. So I'm not being some prude or some crazy, some Scrooge. My point is that our values are capitalism, sex, right? Excess. I mean, every time that I come back, and I'm not above this, is I realize how overweight we are because we eat excessively, no matter how poor or rich we are. So my point is, what are the values that we export to the world? It definitely is not Jesus, faith, faithfulness, and long-lasting marriages. I mean, do any of it? I mean, I've been married, and as I said, with love and faithfulness to one woman. I've been with one woman for the last 30 years. One woman. And that maybe is like a dying thing, right, with my generation, Gen X. Do you know anybody parents, friends, church leaders that have been faithful to one woman for 30 years. Maybe your grandparents, right? And that's wonderful. Maybe your parents are faithful. Maybe and again, I'm not saying like, oh, look at you, look at me. No, no, no. My point is that that's been the breakdown of the family, because women have chosen to be promiscuous, men continue to be promiscuous, and now you have this promiscuous libertarian kind of culture where everything goes and anything goes. No rules, no laws, because as I said, the pendulum has to swing. And so we have this mess. We have to go back to biblical principles. We have to go back to rules. We have to go back to process, to helping people. We have to go back to disciple making. And it's not just intersectional dynamics. It's anxiety, it's fear, it's worry. It is capitalism and riches and fame and glory and money and overeating. All of these values, like the podcaster was saying, what values? What values? Wouldn't it be great if you and I in our churches were known for our values? That we don't overeat, overspend, that we are faithful to one woman and one wife, and then we have families, that we're building families once again, that we restore families. Are my kids going to follow my example? I hope so, that they're faithful to one woman and one wife for 30 years and have 3 college graduates that love Jesus. Are we the last generation? Am I even a part of that generation? Are there a lot of my peers? I would say yes. Okay. I can think of 2 of my peers out of maybe 5 or 6, 10 that have been faithful for maybe 25, 30 years. It definitely happened more. Well, in the previous generation, it happened more. It happened less starting with us. And now since us, meaning kids maybe born in the 2000s, kids that are now in the 30s or maybe 20s that are married, it's happening less and less. And yet, speaking of marriage, financial issues, promiscuity issues, women who are 304s, men who are lazy bums, who have given themselves to violence and drugs and alcohol. No one wants to get married. And then you have how expensive things are and all, but men, why don't they have better paying jobs? And so you have all this blame game that can happen. You have a lot of these issues that we need to be fixing. We really need to be talking about these issues. And we need to be, it can't just be some trite verse or a sermon. It really has to go. I mean, look at these guys. They are in your face 24/7. And we go to church once a week, twice a week. I mean, who's winning? And guess why, right? That's why Andrew Tate and Fresh and Fit and all these different podcasts are winning. TikTok, either whether you're hating it or loving it, they're winning and we're losing because they are in your face 24/7. We need 1,000 people like me. I have all the gear. I have all the stuff. We have collectively the wisdom of God. We know what his word says. But I think what we have to do is be honest. What I find repulsive is when Christian leaders come on these programs with lies and BS and a lack of honesty, or just ideals of what the Bible says, but their lives are a wreck. And they can't be honest. That's what I admire, quote unquote, about these people in the manosphere, red pill. They are not hiding anything from anyone. They come with their ideals or their lack of ideals or values or lack of values. They come with their truth or non-truths or lies, including the women at the Fresh and Fit podcast, right? They come exactly as they are. No cap, as I say. I need to have all those sound effects. No cap. Stop the cap. Whereas we as Christian people, we're like, oh yeah, the values and the verses. And yet the reality is that you're addicted to porn. You overspend, you over exercise, you oversleep, all these things, right? And we're not being honest. And that's why then we fall into the same bad habits. Then we have to hide and live in shame and guilt and shame. We have to be honest, not just about the huge crises, but about the everyday crisis, about the daily struggle, and to be in relationship with each other, to have wise counsel, to have people like me and others who have been through it, who have the skills. And really, it doesn't have to be some educated person. Just simply saying, me too. Yes, I know what you're going through. Let's talk about it. versus just church and events and more parties and more events and more giving and more serving and more. No, 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 no. That's all good, but we have to go down to the real McCoy, where people really live. Young women, I would say, have to lead the way because they tend to be more honest than men. Not always. And then we as men, we have to come together because we don't like to be honest when there's women around. We're hardly honest when we're together with other men because most men can't even listen. Most men will just go to hyper, what do they call it? Spiritual bypassing and hyper verse quoting. And as good as that is, and it is very helpful, you have to have some place, some people, and I'm one of them, that can process and guide you and listen and can say yes. For example, maybe I'll close with this. Just a couple of weeks ago, I've been coaching this one young lady who lost her father about a year ago, tragically and suddenly. And now she is beginning to hit her. It takes a while when you lose a father. It takes a while for anyone when you lose someone that's close to you. And sometimes, as I said, in the church can be guilty of just kind of pushing that under the rug or sweeping it under the rug, and just Bible study and prayer and anointings and revivals, great. But not everyone is healed that way. A lot of people need more of that, actually, I would say. But she was telling me that her brother came in just a few weeks ago and began to yell at her. He's only 14. She's 22, 23, and he's 14. And it's hitting him now. And he began to yell at her just out of his own pain, not because he was mad at her, but saying something to the effect of that he doesn't want to be like his dad and be angry, and that he now understands why his dad really died, and that's because he was angry. Guess what? At God. And I thought, man, that's when it hits home, when people are losing their lives because they're angry at God, because they didn't have a place or people. And this young man's father had a ton of friends. He was a typical, quote, Hispanic man. Tons of parties and friends and family and beer and church and Catholic this and church that and trips and vacations, and just a wonderful guy. And yet he died angry at God. And now his young son is afraid he's going to do the same thing. And we have to have. And now people say, well, counseling and therapy, what's the point of all that? Doesn't help. You're going to just medicate my kid and give him more drugs. Absolutely. We can't do that. I think a lot of that is a big scam. But the church, man, we have to be the answer to people's prayers. And a young man like him needs, yes, someone. I'm not a therapist in that traditional way. I'm a coach. And some people need counseling and therapy, and maybe medication for a season. I'm not sure. I'm not a doctor. But I know what I've seen and what I've needed and what I've done for other people is have a empathic ear that's educated, that knows how to guide people through some of that stuff, that can help people through some of that trauma. And it's not Fresh and Fit and Andrew Tate who are the only ones that are, quote, helping young people to know what a man really is, or know what a man's supposed to be. Because we can't let the Andrew Tates of the world teach our young kids what it's like to be a true man of God. Even though he was always saying haram, and he's always saying that he's a man of God, and he's a godly man, and yet here we are, right, with these charges that he's going through and et cetera. So we need Christian responses to Andrew Tate. We need the Christian Andrew Tate to stand up. We need 1,000. And I think it's you and me. It's not just one person. It's not just one pastor. It's 1,000 of us. But we have to come together, and we have to talk more about these topics in these formats, at least online, through TikTok and Instagram and all the rest, until we develop a groundswell to be able to have this become more normal, because there's no doubt that this is a need in the culture, and the Christian church is not doing enough but I hope, and I know you also hope, to be a part of that solution. And so let's continue the discussion. Thanks again for being here. Share this broadcast. I'll see